I will make you a cake, but I'm not going to go out to the club with you and spend $60 to $100 on one night. Hi, I'm Christina. I'm 25. I'm a grad student, and last year I made $33,000.
Hey, I'm Corinne. I live in New York. I'm 24. I work in data at a college, and now I make $85K.
So, we shall begin. How did we meet each other?
We met in college. We actually met because one of our mutual friends was creating a housing group because we were both desperate for sophomore year housing. And so I met Christina through our housing group that our friend arranged. And so we started living together for the first time our sophomore year of college.
We've lived ultimately like 5 years together, but like on and off. There was times when we didn't live together, but we've lived together for the past 3 years.
Yeah. What is your rent? Is it average, low, or high for your area? So our rent is currently $27.50 for a 3-bedroom apartment, and we currently split that as a 2/3, 1/3 situation. So I pay 2/3 at $18.33.
And I paid $916 a month.
Yeah, and our rent has generally stayed pretty constant as New York City rents have gone completely crazy.
Do you have any debt?
I do not have any debt, and that's a total product of family wealth and resources, and the fact that my parents are very financially responsible, and also I have a good relationship with them, and so they were always planning on paying for my college in combination with some other family members and some benefits that my dad has as someone who also works at a higher education institution, has a dependent tuition grant scenario, and I have not accrued any debt since becoming financially independent.
And by the time I finish my master's degree, I will have over $100,000 of student loan debt. I started off, my first year of college was completely funded. And as I went throughout college, tuition increased, but my financial aid did not increase. And it actually decreased after a few years due to a situation where my brother didn't end up going to college. Like, financial aid is kind of whack.
It's so messed up.
I've paid off so much of my student loan debt. You know, we calculated it was like, I've paid like $30,000 in, and the principal has like not gone down that much.
Great. Do you have any savings or investments? What's your best saving strategy?
So I did have a lot of savings, and I have been working those down in grad school after I paid my first semester of grad school. I think after college, I saved over $20,000 on like a mid-range salary, like 50 to 60K in 2 years. And basically, I just kind of budget for all the things I need. I have like a little bit of discretionary spending, and then whatever at the end of the month that was like net income that I did not spend, I try to put into a savings account. But I don't have any investments right now.
Yeah, I saved a somewhat similar amount of more like 25K in the same kind of time range after college, which is with overall much lower kind of required expenses because I am not paying off debt. In terms of my best saving strategy, it's tricky. It's something I've really been working on. I would say like since my personal rent has doubled, which was starting in August, I've definitely had a harder time saving as much as I used to. I used to be able to save more like 10 to 20% of my income every month, if not more. And now it's been definitely more challenging between that and a couple other areas of my life in which expenses have risen. So it's definitely something I'm still working on, but I use like never remember if this is the right term for it, like the zero-based like budgeting app to try to like set aside money for savings in advance and then actively like see myself take away from it if I need to. So that's my strategy right now.
What was your financial upbringing like? How was money talked about growing up?
Interesting. So I grew up in, there's lots of different terms for this, but we sometimes use the one like professional class background. My parents are both primary care doctors, though one of them has always been part-time. But I grew up in that kind of context, so generally feeling that I was, especially in public schools, like of the richest, if not the richest person in my direct environment. But in general, there was a big value of like financial responsibility and talking about money. I would say my family definitely had the thing that a lot of kind of lower end of the upper class spectrum families have, where my parents would not share like specific income numbers or specific expense numbers or exactly how much really big or complex purchases cost them unless I specifically asked. They wouldn't automatically share that, but generally shared a lot about like their kind of financial approach in general, and very much so like made me aware of like what they would be helping with and what I wouldn't, and how much certain things cost if I want to take on the cost, or if they thought that they should not take on the cost and I should, how much that would be. So that's what I would say my upbringing was like.
Yeah, mine is like very different, and we talk about this a lot. Like, my mom has a college degree. She works as like an administrator at a church, and she has always been the primary breadwinner and has always worked multiple jobs for as long as I've been alive. And I think my financial upbringing was like, you know, I wouldn't say the most precarious, but there was a lot of like stress. Like, I think we see this a lot because I still have this where I go like, oh my God, financial meltdown. Like I catastrophize immediately if there's like a big unforeseen expense, or I have to like take out another loan for something, or I have to put something on a credit card. I freak out. And that was just the way that I was raised growing up. And I think it's just like my parents didn't want to worry me about money, but then I just like ended up being worried about money anyway. And then I really had to like earn anything I wanted to. And I was also a full scholarship kid at a private high school. And so I was like on the opposite side where I was like the poorest student in my educational place. And then I would feel awkward about trying to buy extra things and kind of like mooching off of my friends. And then I got to college and we went to like a very rich school, and I really had difficulty dealing with like the difference in class between me and the other people at our college.
Next question is, how do we share expenses? As of August of last year, switched to doing a 2/3, 1/3 scenario of the rent. So we live in a 3-bedroom where the 3rd bedroom is one of those like New York kind of fake bedrooms, like doesn't have a closet, much smaller than the other rooms. And so we transitioned to me paying for 2/3 of the rent and Christina for paying for 1/3, which aligned with the time that she started graduate school, instead of having an income where we used to have a lot more similar incomes. In fact, when we actually like originally moved into our apartment with our 3rd roommate as well, we all had very similar incomes in the mid-40s. So we do that in terms of the rent splitting, and then I use that 3rd room for an office and also a guest room. And I think, so that's an obvious way that we share expenses. I think another big one is just in terms of kind of like day-to-day household stuff. We really try to kind of have a general attitude of like, some things are going to be directly split and like Venmo requesting, stuff like that. And other things are like, it's all going to either even out in the end, or it's okay if it doesn't. Kind of an approach to a lot of the things. And just the idea that we like care a lot about our communal space, whether it's like getting new furniture, getting food that we both share, or other kind of supplies that like we kind of just make a decision and based on our personal preferences for whether we want to split it or not.
Initially, we had our 3rd roommate whom we loved dearly moving out, and we have lived often with other people. And we knew that we wanted to continue living together, and we were talking about moving, and I kind of we had a very open and honest conversation where I said, my income is going to be split or going to go down very soon. I was basically like, no. And you actually proposed the 2/3, 1/3 rent split, which I would have never asked. And I think we talked a little bit about this, but like at first I know that you don't think this way, but I was like almost worried to like say I wanted anything in the apartment because I felt like I didn't have ownership over it. And like in previous situations where I lived with someone who like had more power over the space or had financial power, I was like so concerned to put my foot down about anything or to like disagree with them about anything. But I've like literally never felt an ounce of resentment like in the entire time we've lived together about expenses. And like in terms of paying for food or paying for furniture, or just, you know, you take on the cost of the 2nd bedroom. And so that has ended up working out like super well.
What challenges have you faced as friends with very different incomes? Which is a fun one. So as I said, when we first, in our first scenario living together post-college, we were in a scenario where our income was the same, but like we still had an open enough conversation to know that that didn't mean that our experience of that income was the same, especially because
Loans, baby.
yeah, the private loans did not have any of that pandemic situation. They were immediately, having to pay those back. Just that kind of difference. And then also in terms of like different amounts of savings that we were starting with and like all that kind of stuff. So acknowledging that, but started with the same and then kind of transitioned to being very different over time. And obviously now is the most extreme it's ever been in terms of me currently making $85K and Christina being a grad student predominantly and not having a consistent part-time job, just a lot of kind of odds and ends things. I try with like when we are doing things with other of our friends who have whether it's high incomes now or kind of high safety nets from family, to like advocate for the like lower expense option in those situations, even when it's not necessarily for my benefit, so that's kind of like two of us saying it instead of just one person saying it. So I think that's the kind of things that we've been working on. But I think because we've been friends for long enough and kind of discussed this stuff for long enough, I think we haven't had that much of that sense of like intense recent challenges, but more just like navigating the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. And like this next question is about like uncomfortable situations with wealthier friends. And that's the thing we just run into the most, which is just like, how do I manage a situation where I'm like not making stable income? My budget is so constrained. Like I do not have room for a lot of extra spending, and people will be like, come to my birthday party, and you're expected to spend minimum $50. And like in that situation, I'm like, can I show up for you and not spend any money? But people don't know how to respond to that in a way. And like one thing that has always been super helpful to me is that you in that situation will often like take charge and be like, project management, how are we all like paying money? People will make these like assumptions. They'll be like, okay, so we're just going to order a bunch of stuff from the table and everyone's going to pay for something equally.
Yeah, often with alcohol too.
With alcohol too. They'll be like, we're going to split a bottle of wine that costs more than your car. And I'm like, no, pass. And you're like, you'll always be like, actually I'm going to step in and we're all going to pay for our own meal. And if you did not buy anything or if you didn't have dinner here or whatever. And then also like part of it is like, we love being hosts, trying to diffuse it by like offering our own hospitality instead. And then we can like gauge it to be what we feel comfortable paying in that situation. Like I will make you a cake, but I'm not going to go out to the club with you and spend $60 to $100 on one night. Biggest financial secret of your industry, don't live in America.
Yeah, I think it's insurance, right?
Insurance, yeah, it's the biggest thing. Like if you're being paid to have sessions with clients, like right now I work in a nonprofit setting and do like supportive counseling, and I get paid no money for that. It's educational, folks. But I think that ultimately in terms of like the therapy, counseling, pay per service, like so much of it is contrary to your ability to support your clients. And that's because of our insurance model. And Medicare for all, baby. That's all I gotta say. That's the biggest financial secret. That's what we need in my profession.
So my industry is in like higher education and colleges specifically. And there's so many financial secrets to colleges, like where to even begin. There is an increasing number of really high paying jobs at the top, and that everyone else's pay has been going down. And I work in I have a higher education administration job specifically, and that has become an increasingly financially viable part of higher education as being a faculty member has become less and less viable as it's been turned over into adjunct positions and things like that. So I think it's the fact that I'm making $85K relatively young, which again was partly because of having a really big change in like responsibilities due to turnover and things like that. But while a lot of faculty members will almost never make that much in their entire time in higher education, even though they're doing the actual work of educating students, and I'm doing kind of tangential work to the mission of higher ed. The next question is, how do you approach tough money conversations as both friends and roommates?
I think the one thing is that we both like walk from a point of like no entitlement in this conversation, and then also one of like collective care, because we know a lot of roommates and even a lot of friends who are roommates who they like kind of just like coexist in the same space, and we like genuinely live together and like live communally. Like we buy things together. At this point, like if one of us were to move out, it would low-key be like a divorce. Like who gets the Le Creuset? And I do. But I think that like it's like a lack of entitlement. But also I think that like our families really support, I think, the financial decisions we made. Like I know of people who've been in a similar situation where the parents are like, would not be okay with our rent situation, where I feel like your family is very supportive, and your parents have been like financially supportive of me. They're very generous people. They're very considerate about a lot of things. And I think that that has kind of like seeped into our relationship as well. Next question. What has been your biggest financial mistake?
You go first.
Okay. Can I say college? I don't regret it. I have no regrets. Like I learned a lot. I valued the experiences I had. I feel like I came out a much like smarter and well-rounded person, and I genuinely loved what I studied and like was intentional about it. But I think that like if I knew what I knew now going into it, I never would have, I don't think I would have picked the same college. Like I don't think I would have picked the same experience. I think knowing the financial burden that it put on me later. But I also think more broadly, it's like a continuous mistake, but in the way that like my parents will catastrophize about money and will like not make a big expense because they can't afford it, and then they just like keep duct taping the problem long term. Like
with literal duct tape.
Literal duct tape. They like I feel like that's my thing that I'm still working on, which is like when you have a student loan payment that you can't make and you have to go into loan forbearance or default or something like that, which is I've come very close to many, many times to not catastrophize. But I also know that sometimes it just helps to like go to you and be like, Corinne, I'm sad. I'm going to cry. Comfort me in those moments. So I think those are like, one is like the biggest financial mistake I think I made, which was like on incomplete information when I was like 17. And then the other
impossible scenarios to begin with.
Impossible scenario. This is America.
You're looking at 1 year, I mean, just to the higher education perspective, you're looking at 1 year of a financial aid package with a promise that will continue, and made what seemed to be a good choice at the time without the knowledge that it wasn't a very common practice at our college for financial aid packages to differ so much during the 4 years, but a lot of colleges in America will literally give you a better financial aid package your first year intentionally than they ever plan to give you again to entice you into the school.
But tell me, what's your biggest financial mistake?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is an interesting question because I think it is just an example of how having kind of familial wealth and like kind of higher income jobs, which is the primary source of my parents' wealth, is just the jobs that they have as primary care physicians, the way that insulates you from a lot of possible like large financial mistakes because you're not taking on like debt or doing something that's as risky because there's lower risk. So to me, my financial mistakes are just kind of like the day-to-day ways that I like overspend on certain things or don't understand a policy fully and then end up paying for like, I don't know, some like silly overcharge thing at an airport, or too much that I didn't want to spend on a food thing or on some part of my travel or buying a ticket too last minute or like things like that rather than something really, really big. But I do think that I have generally avoided kind of any like extreme or like really irresponsible financial decisions. But a lot of that is because of having a certain sense of security. And so it's just really the day-to-day kind of overspending that to me feels like an ongoing kind of sense of mistake in certain categories. I mean, I think always working on like food spending in New York is a huge one, but rather than these kind of like bigger things, which I don't feel that I've had any really big mistakes on that.
It's like that tweet I saw the other day where it's like living in New York is spending $35 18 times a week for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, which is
and then it's like
what it's like. Yeah.
Yeah. High key.
So this is actually really relevant to these last couple things, but if one of you couldn't make rent for whatever reason, how would you handle it?
Oh. I'm like, the situation I can imagine this most likely happening in it is if I had like a medical thing. Like, I get sick a lot and I have chronic illness, and Corinne always takes care of me a lot, but then that affects my ability to earn money, and often I end up spending a lot of money because healthcare is expensive. So I'm imagining, what would we do?
I would hope that we would have the kind of conversation and openness to talk about, like, given that it's far more likely that that would be a scenario where you were not being able to make rent than I would, which is no reflection on you, but just being a graduate student, and expenses can be unforeseen, that, like, talking about who is then going to be paying that and how that can be, and, like, is that, like, a paying back timeline? Like, how are we going to think about that in a way that would not make you feel really, really, really kind of uncomfortable or undermined or disempowered in that context, I think would be the conversation. And I trust you enough to know that you would bring it up well ahead of time unless it came up extremely last minute.
Yeah.
Because I don't trust our landlords. They would not.
They're bad. Landlords are bad.
They would not. They would definitely not be very considerate of that situation.
I mean, in some ways, I feel like I wouldn't go to you in that situation because I already know you're taking on the rent burden. There's like people that I would borrow. My brother's an asshole about if I ask him for money, but he would probably loan me the money because he just has like very few expenses.
Yeah, so just talking together probably about like who would be a person that you should go to and how should you navigate that.
I have a lot of old lady friends that like always want to be helpful in a cinch.
Yeah, exactly. So I think just talking about, how about that?
If you could go back and give your 18-year-old self any piece of advice.
Any advice?
What would it be? I think any advice, yeah.
Okay. These questions are always really hard for me.
You were born an adult, so.
Gosh, any advice? I think just like whatever it is that you're thinking about right now is not that deep, you'll figure it out kind of stuff. I feel like that kind of thing universally. And just having more confidence in certain things, working out, and like I think especially 18, thinking like at that time was when I was starting college, and I think so the biggest thing then would just be like you'll find your people, like patience is fine, like this kind of thing. Just freshman year of college was pretty rough, so I think it's more that kind of stuff. And financially, I think just kind of that I would really have pushed myself to learn certain skills earlier and having a more established budgeting system, because the one I had in college came a little bit late and was a little incomplete and things like that.
Yeah, I think for me, this is relevant for money and just like general life, but knowing your like really think about your priorities and think about your boundaries, not just like financially, you know, putting foot down for someone who's like pressuring you to spend more money on something you don't care about, but also just like safety, thinking about just the ways that like people will kind of push they'll push you to take risks and like get outside of your comfort zones in ways that are like not intentional or planned. And I think that just really thinking about your boundaries and your priorities and like how to get the most out of your stuff while not taking like crazy risks, I think would be super important. I made a terrible decision when I was 18 that I was like, I'm going to go backpacking in Europe and Africa for 3 months with $700. And that did not work out quite so well. Yeah.
And then just the universal sleep more.
Yeah. Oh, sleep more. Sleep more. All the children out there, please sleep. Sleep is more important. That's one of our fundamental values that we share in common, is that we love our sleep.
Yeah.
Great. Well, love you, Corinne. Thank you for being the best roommate and friend.
Thank you, Christina.